Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Kimberly Cloud Show. I'm your host, Kimberly Cloud. I have a very special guest here for the show today. Go ahead and announce to the world who you are and where you stem from.
Okay, well, hello, Kimberly. Thank you for having me on your show. It's a real honor. I love what you're doing. I love your energy, and you're such a busy person. I just think it's so great how hungry you are to make all this content that I think ultimately is really going to help people from different walks of life. My name is Elizabeth Hendrick, and I have just published my first book, which is actually a memoir. It's called Exodai. We'll be talking a little bit about this book in due course, but it's essentially the story of how I came to terms with my sexuality, with particular focus on a very torturous relationship I had with a Japanese dominatrix. So anyway, I live here now in Japan, and I'm British, as you can hear from my accent. I was brought up in a very happy family. And it was not really until I was about the age of 10 that I started to run into issues with my sexuality. I started to realize that I was attracted to other women. That really set me up. That sort of, I internalized this guilt and shame in my adolescence that got into my psyche and hardwired my psyche. And as I went into adulthood, it basically kept sabotaging my adult experience, particularly in relationships. And it wasn't really until probably 7 years ago, when I was about 44, that I actually finally accepted my sexuality at a deep subconscious level. So I was living my life in a lot of denial and doing some very crazy things. I actually worked in financial services for most of my life. I sort of retired from financial services about 5 years ago to really focus on writing my book. And writing this book has been quite a journey, I can tell you. I mean, it's been a very cathartic process. I was in a very, very torturous, mentally and physically torturous relationship with this Japanese dominatrix, and I went right down to the ground zero. And a lot of my life is about my sexuality, and I decided to write this book, put pen to paper and get the story out there, because I think it will help people who are coming to terms with their sexuality or just learning to love themselves.
What did you used to do? Well said. What did you used to do back, in the day? Did you travel? I seen you've been to Dubai, and so tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, okay. So I was in East Anglia, brought up in East Anglia, Norfolk. That's the sort of bulge, the buttock of England, I always think, if you look at the geographical map. And I was there for most of my adolescence. We moved closer to London for my sixth form, and then I went to Durham University in the north of England. So my family had always been very much in contact with people overseas, because my parents actually used to live in the South Pacific. Can you believe it? My father worked for the government in the South Pacific on an island called Santo, basically they were very familiar with traveling overseas, and consequently a lot of our family holidays we went and stayed with their friends. And so I always had this itch for the external, outside of Britain. And when I finished school, I decided to go to Paris for a year, and that's when it sort of all begun, tiptoeing into the overseas arena. And I really enjoyed the expatriate lifestyle. So I took 1 year off between school and university. Then I did my mathematics degree. Can you believe it? A mathematician who finally ends up being a writer. I was in London for 4 or 5 years. And I got this opportunity to move to Japan in 1999. And that was my first experience in Japan. And that was really a wonderfully exotic, colorful and rich experience. And Japan was a bit like a utopia for me. The weather was great. The people are so polite. The landscape is so beautiful. The food is delicious. And best of all, everything runs efficiently. The trains are not late in Japan, unlike Britain, where there can be leaves on the track and it's the end of the day for the trains.
Yeah. And,
so you mentioned Dubai. Yeah, I moved after my 5 years in Japan. I actually moved back to England. And I got into the world of startup ventures. So I'd been in financial services. I'd been a headhunter in financial services in Tokyo. And I decided I wanted to go back to England. And I tried to start a film magazine, just randomly went into publishing, into the whole startup thing. I wanted to become the next Richard Branson, who started a magazine and then ended up owning this billionaire empire. Didn't quite happen to me that way, but I spent 4 years in London in venture capital, basically. And I actually, that ended with me going on to a reality TV show. It was a reality TV show that didn't do very well back in 2007. So it sort of only did one series and then it was never repeated. It was the brainchild of Peter Jones from Dragon's Den. Now, a lot of people, do you know Shark Tank in America?
Yes.
You know, with Ken O'Leary and Mark Cuban. Occasionally, they have a guest from Britain called Peter Jones. Very occasionally, he's on. Shark Tank is called Dragon's Den in the UK, and Peter Jones is on pretty much every episode. Anyway, he went solo and he did a show called Tycoon in 2007, and I was one of the 6 contestants on that show. Anyway, I made a big fool of myself on that show. I seemed to burst into tears under camera. Anyway, I came off the show. I was one of the first 2 people to be kicked off, business cancelled, and it was all very traumatic for me. I went in with high expectations, and I really fooled myself into thinking it was my big break, and it was my big break, but in the negative sense. It was kind of the earthquake in my life that really sent me to ground zero, rock bottom. And out of that, that was when I first realized, when I was about 34, 35, I first realized that I didn't love myself as a lesbian woman. So it was the huge earthquake in my life that enabled me to see clearly and get some self-awareness. I had been in denial that there was a problem. I thought everything was fine and it was just the external, that life circumstances were treating me badly. But in fact, the problem was internal. And it was as a result of that show, I did a lot of reflection. I spent a lot of time in rehabilitation, and I went to France and spent some time in the country reading a very good book called The Road Less Traveled by Scott Peck. You might have heard of it. Excellent self-help book. And that did help me. And I realized I hadn't come to terms with sexuality. And I thought, okay, I need to get a job. I need to get back on my feet, and I need to go and see a counselor. And that's what I did. And then that's what took me to Dubai. I went back into headhunting in financial services. And then I spent 5 years in Dubai from 2008 to 2013, having a very nice life, living in a studio apartment right on the beach. Every morning I opened up the blind to see turquoise blue skies, sand, the Persian Gulf, absolutely beautiful. Dubai, it's sunny 360 days out of 365 each year. And I love the sun. That's why I'm in Japan. There's a lot of sun in Japan as well. England, it's mostly rain. I do not like the English weather. So yes, I was in Dubai. And then I finally, in 2013, I actually decided to move back to Japan. And a lot of it was to do with this dominatrix that I had fallen in love with. I'd visited Tokyo and basically got sucked in. It was a codependent relationship. We pressed each other's buttons, and I got into this very, very toxic relationship. So it was all part of the healing process. So was Dubai. That was part of the healing process. It took me from 2007 till 2014 to self-heal. It was a 7-year process of learning to love myself, finishing with this boot camp 2-year relationship with the Japanese dominatrix. And that was why I moved back to Japan. But I'm still here. I'm still here 10 years on because I love this country.
Tell me, how did you meet the Japanese dominatrix, man?
She came. So, let's see. So when I was living in Dubai, I had a lot of friends from the fetish scene in Tokyo, and I was still in touch with them. And I always send people Christmas cards every year. I'm very traditional in that regard, and it's a very good way of keeping in touch. It forces me to reach out to people, say, "Have I still got your same address?" And just that connection is so important. I think connections with your friends, I can't stress, it's so important. Hold on to them throughout your life. Don't let them drop, because it's as you get older and older, it really is helpful to have your friends' support as you go through the trials of life. Anyway, I had kept in touch with my fetish friends in Tokyo, And two of my best friends, a Japanese lady and a British man, were going to get married, and they went to Bali to have their wedding in Bali, and they hired a villa, a 10-bedroom villa, for 5 days, and they invited me from Dubai. So I went across from Dubai, and this was where I first met Tomo. The name of the dominatrix in my book is Tomo. That's a pseudonym, of course, but in the book she's called Tomo, so we'll call her Tomo here. She happened to be one of the other invitees, so she also stayed in the villa for that 5-day period to celebrate my friend's wedding. And she was clearly a dominatrix, and I was clearly a submissive. So we sort of hit it off, and that was the first time I met her. But it turned out she was a bit of a tease. I tend to attract women who are teasers, and I get all fouled up by them. And then I moved. So there was a holiday, so I moved back to Dubai, and I never thought about her again until 2012, when I was still living in Dubai. I went on a holiday to Tokyo, and one of our mutual friends invited her along. And it was only then that I discovered and learned that she had been very attracted to me when she met me in Bali, really interested in me, and really hoped that she would see me again. So that's really, I met her in Bali, saw her again in Tokyo, fell in love, sparks started to fly. And Bob's your uncle, within a year, I had moved back to Japan in February 2013. I just said Bob's your uncle. That's an English expression. Do you know what that means?
No.
Bob's your uncle. We say it in England. It's very old, antiquated expression. Bob's your uncle. It just means, and suddenly, and would you believe it? It's like that. That's the sentiment. Would you believe it? Bob's your uncle. It's I have to be careful not to use too many of these old antiquated English expressions. I was like, wait, I'm talking to an American audience. I need to translate that. What does that mean? Anyway, so that's how I met her, basically in Bali, way back in about 2010, I think, 2009, 2010.
Okay, to backtrack a little bit.
Yep.
Tell me a little bit about excerpts in your book, like the excerpts in your book that you want to highlight.
Okay. Yeah. So I'll just put my glasses on for this. There's a quite an interesting bit where I have my first sort of BDSM experience. So I was very interested in bondage, and I had known that from a very young age. So when I was 5 and 6, I sort of imagined myself being tied to a chair and all sorts of stuff. So how much would you like me to read?
As long as it's PG-13, you can read whatever you want.
Okay. All right. As long as it's PG-13. Okay. I don't know if we can read this. Let's see. Here we go. Just as I was at the point of aborting, let me go back a little bit. All of a sudden, Mark called out. So the context is I'm at this private S&M party, and my Finnish friend has just tied me up. And then suddenly Mark calls out, I think we should whip Elizabeth. She's been a very naughty girl. She should be punished. Now, you need to stop me if I start to go over the 13-year-old line. Okay, this is not going to get very sexual, but it is themes of S&M. Anyway, I think we should whip Elizabeth. She's been a very naughty girl. She should be punished. This suggestion was met with approval on all sides. Of course, it all depended on my consent. Now, this was really crossing boundaries, and my Christian morals stepped in to intervene. I should object to being whipped. It wasn't something I wanted anyway. Pain didn't turn me on. Just as I was at the point of aborting, one of the Japanese girls on the other side of the coffee table caught my eye. She'd been quiet all night, but now she was looking on with glee at my humiliation. Her head was cocked to one side. She was smiling at me with authority and raising her eyebrows suggestively. She wasn't exactly my type, but there was an aura of energy around her that commanded my attention. Her masterful eyes seemed to delve into my soul and pierce me. All at once I was captivated, and as if hypnotized, I found myself replying to Mark. I'm okay to be whipped, but only by her. I nodded towards the girls. You want Nozomi to whip you? Yes, that Japanese girl in the corner. Mark raised his eyebrows and nodded his approval. He said something in Japanese to Nozomi, and her smile turned into a beam. She sat up straight, leant forwards to pick up her glass of champagne. Keeping her eyes fixed on me, she took a sip and set the glass back down on the table, then began removing her lace gloves. Her aura increased, and the connection between us became electric. Mark produced a riding crop from under the coffee table and jammed it between my teeth. Then he instructed me to go to Nozomi. I obeyed his command, shuffling on my knees with the crop clutched in my mouth, my arms still bound behind me. I delivered the instrument to Nozomi like a dog offering a newspaper to its owner. She took the crop and brandished it, tilting her chin up and looking down her nose at me. The power she exuded made me feel like putty in her hands. Do you want me to go on?
Wow, that is beautiful. I mean, when did you come to the point where you were like, okay, this is too much?
Well, I kind of never did actually. So in this scene, she
Well,
starts
relation,
whipping me.
yeah, with your,
Um, she, I I just went into this sort of subspace. I mean, let me just.
yeah,
I don't know if this is.
continue.
I don't know if this is allowed. Let me see. Deeply engaged in her assault, Nozomi knelt and rolled me over back and forth like a baker rolling pastry, applying her whip all over my backside and thighs. The unbearable pain now came in droves, stinging, searing, throbbing, but I was determined to endure it for her. I was exhilarated to see Nozomi's pleasure, which in turn sent me into a state of spiritual ecstasy. Our connection was primal. It was not a sexual experience, but one of pure euphoria. Driven by willpower, I passed a threshold and realized I could go on accepting her torture forever, just to see the joy in her face. My body began to shake. Suddenly, all my worlds seemed to converge in one unified point. My adolescent fantasies of suffering pain for the damsel in distress were met in me. The shame of my sexuality evaporated from my soul. My life made sense, and I reached a state of bliss. It was incredible, and the joy in Nozomi's face sustained my ecstasy. So that was the sort of thing that was going on. I was getting these incredible highs, and it's actually if you're in an S&M engagement, if you're in S&M play and you're being properly tortured, what actually happens is there's a very scientific side to the experience in that your brain will start to emit endorphins because of the pain you're experiencing, and those endorphins do actually make you feel quite high. I mean, in the end, I got addicted to torture, but pain didn't actually turn me on. It does. So I'm not a masochist. So masochists are turned on by pain. I was a submissive, so I like to give pleasure to the dominatrix. I liked to suffer to make her happy. But that was all intertwined with this psychological, with this deep subconscious lack of self-love. And I thought at a subconscious level, I deserved to be punished. So there was, I mean, it's very interesting. BDSM can be a wonderful framework for two grounded people who know exactly what they want and are completely confident in themselves. And they can get into BDSM practices and it can be very euphoric. But if you have two people who are not stable and get into a codependent relationship, it can be very dangerous because you're acting out a victim persecutor role and you plug into each other. So this is what was ultimately happening to me. The BDSM became a framework for me to punish myself because I didn't lack self-love.
So do you think, well said, do you think it would be therapeutic in relationships if safely done based on your, you know, everything you've seen with it?
Oh, I think there's, if you've got two grounded people who are very much in love and very respectful to each other and want exactly what the other person gives to them, you can have a really fantastic, blessed, euphoric, sensational, exotic relationship. And unfortunately, a lot of the time, it's not as clean as that. A lot of the time, and I mean, it happens in all kinds of relationships. It doesn't have to be in a BDSM framework. take the woman who's with a husband who's beating her up. Um, Quite often, when that woman finally leaves that husband and takes advice of her friend, leave him, leave him, leave him. Finally, she leaves the husband. 6 months later, she starts dating a very nice man, and then he starts beating her up. And so, what's happening is that if that record keeps repeating itself, it usually means there's an internal disconnect. And of course, I'm not saying it's not the victim is to be blamed for what's happening. The men are absolutely outrageous for beating up a woman. But if she keeps attracting those kinds of men into her life, she's got something internal. There's an internal disconnect, which is attracting the dysfunctional relationship. And for me, there was an internal disconnect. I didn't love myself, so I attracted a very dysfunctional relationship. But if that disconnect weren't there, so now I'm actually in a very, very happy, loving relationship now. I've been living with my partner for 5 years. Thank you very much. But we don't actually practice BDSM because she's not into it, and that's fine. I don't need it so much anymore. I'm 52 now, so I'm I don't. It's just we just do the normal vanilla sex. It's perfectly adequate. Perfectly happy with that. It's BDSM can be absolutely wonderful, but you've got to be going in from a place of strength and confidence and self-love.
Wow. And tell the people, if you, how did you ever have like book signing, things?
So when I launched my book, I actually launched through Amazon KDP. So it's a self-publishing platform. But the great thing about it is that they are so advanced in their technology now that they just print the books on demand. So I didn't have to buy 1,000 books and then try and sell them. So I'm all over all the global markets in Amazon, which includes China, India, Russia, Mexico. So it's very much out there, and you can go onto Amazon and find my book and buy it straight off the platform. You can get an ebook or you can get a paperback, and Amazon will print it and send it out. I actually published in September 2023. The question was, did I do a book signing? I didn't do a book signing because these days book marketing has changed a little bit because of the internet. It's all the book marketing really is done online these days. Book signings are more for famous people or famous authors. And when I launched, I was an complete unknown. When I published my book, I was an unknown author. So to hold a book signing event is a little bit vain. And also the other thing is I was based in Japan, and I'm doing some talks and I'm talking about my book, and if people come and if people want me to sign the book, but at the launch, a book signing event per se, it made more sense for me to focus my efforts on the online marketing and promotion effort.
Okay. And if you needed to give any advice to people that wants to travel the world and write books like yourself, what kind of advice would you give?
Definitely travel. Definitely go for it. Certainly keep a journal of your experiences because they're a great memento for yourself. And if ever you wanted to write about your travels, but I think it's really good if you have an opportunity. If you're wondering whether to take a year off after school before university, or if you've got an opportunity to do something overseas, go for it because it really broadens your horizons. Traveling overseas. I mean, I was brought up a Christian, and I thought Jesus Christ was the only way to God. And after living overseas, you meet all these different cultures. I knew Muslims, I knew Hindus, I knew Buddhists, I knew people who were Shinto, and everybody has a different perspective, largely based on their culture, where they're brought up. And I think it was Albert Einstein who said, you either believe everything is a miracle or you believe nothing is a miracle. So you're either a complete staunch atheist or you are a believer in some way, shape, or form. Now, I embrace all religions and I reject all religions, if you will, because I'm very spiritual. So I still believe there's a God, but I believe God is light, love, and consciousness and energy, and it's everywhere, and it's in me, and it's in you, and we're all connected. And karma, what goes around does come around. But I don't fully adopt the biblical teachings. So I can't really call myself a Christian anymore, but I try to be Christ-like. I think the teachings of Christ were great. I love the New Testament. I'm not so keen on the Old Testament. I mean, I've got mixed fabrics in my clothing. Good heavens, I shouldn't wear mixed fabrics in my clothing. That's what Leviticus says, I think. Anyway, let alone being gay or eating shrimp, but there it is.
Well,
So yes, travel the world. If you get the opportunity, go somewhere different, go somewhere exotic, change your perspective, get a new perspective, broaden your horizons.
one last question. Do you think if
Mm,
you did not travel, that you wouldn't be as enlightened with the cultures out there?
absolutely. Oh, I wouldn't be half as enlightened as I am. I don't think I would have come to this point of self-love. I wouldn't have gone through all these incredible adventures, and I would probably be an accountant somewhere in Britain, um, being very miserable, having disappointing relationships, and not understanding why my life was so bad. I was miserable because I didn't love myself as a lesbian woman, and once I learned to love myself, everything changed. But it was because of my experiences overseas that I got so many multifaceted viewpoints on life and living and being, and I think that really helped me in my healing process. And the one thing that everybody should focus their life on is learning to love and accept yourself and be at one with yourself. It's probably the most important advice I could ever give to anybody. And for me, I was lucky enough to go and travel the world, and not just travel, but particularly live overseas. I lived in Dubai for 5 years. I spent a lot of time in Singapore. I've lived probably now for 10, 15 years in Japan altogether, spent a couple of years in France. So just getting that perspective, learning different cultures is really, really great to broaden the mind. I highly recommend it.
How can the people find you, and how can the people find your book?
Okay, so this is what you're looking for. It's a red rose splattered with a bit of blood. Exodai, Elizabeth Hendrick. If you go onto Amazon and you type in Exodai, it may not come up depending on which market. So you probably need to type in Exodai Hendrick, and it should come up, or Elizabeth Hendrick Exodai. It should come up in search on Amazon. Alternatively, you can go to my website, which is www.exodai, exodai.co.uk. I got the .co.uk site for Exodai, exodai.co.uk, and that's just a landing page. You can sign up for my newsletter, but more importantly, there's a big orange button that says buy on Amazon, and that will take you straight through to the relevant Amazon page for you.
Okay, well,
So, mm.
do you have any other things you would like to talk about?
Well, I think the mission of my book Exodai, really, what I think, I mean, this is a lot of the reviews that I've been getting in. I mean, if you go onto Amazon, you'll see I've got a majority of 5-star reviews, quite a lot of 4 stars, and a few 3 stars, and 1 or 2 lower gradings. It seems to be that what people are loving about this book is its raw honesty. And yes, it is very brutal. It's not for the faint-hearted. It comes with trigger warnings. There's actually a suicide scene in there that I survive, clearly. And there's a lot of very brutal torture scenes. And people have likened my writing to Stephen King in terms of the graphic descriptions. So I was very honored to get that analogy. But I think the book is really going to help people to see what's going wrong in their own lives. If you're in a dysfunctional relationship, if somebody in a dysfunctional relationship read my book and had an aha moment, this is me. I am doing this to myself. If they had an aha moment that motivated them to go and seek help, well, then that would be a triumph for me. This is my sort of mission with my book, is helping people who have been ostracized in their adolescence, in their youth, the people who have internalized self-guilt and self-loathing. I want to help those people who are struggling in their adult lives, because this internalized subconscious level self-guilt and self-loathing and self-hate is sabotaging their adult lives, particularly relationships, maybe their work, their business. If you're an adult and one area of your life is just not working out and just consistently keeps going wrong, 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 the problem probably lies internally. And if people reading my book feel that and get that and relate to that, and then are motivated to go and heal and seek the truth and learn to love themselves, then my book will have had real meaning. And for me, that's sort of one of my purposes in life, I think, is to help people who are dealing with a lack of self-love, to motivate them to see, first of all, see that there's a problem, and then go and do something about that.
Well said. I want to thank you all for watching the show. And Elizabeth Hendricks, can you please stay on the line? Thank you all for watching the show. Have a wonderful day, and thank you.
Thank you very much. Goodbye. Thank you, Kimberly. Bye bye.